Hello all, happy Friday. I am seeing the numbers absolutely tick up from a participant perspective at the moment. We're almost at 300. Thank you all for being here on time very promptly today. So happy Friday. It is my absolute honor to have you join us for our webinar, The Fundamentals of Navigating Psychosocial Hazards in the Workplace. As we allow a few minutes for people to join, almost at 500, I'd like to get the chat warmed up. It's been a bit of a short week for many of us, so I'd love for you to share what was the best meal or snack you've eaten over the past week. Don't be shy. I'll give you all a moment to pop that in the chat. For me, I was at a wedding in Phillip Island last weekend, and the pumpkin arancinis were a total standout. We'll jump into introductions in a moment, but for now, Lisa, what meal from the weekend or the past week is top of mind for you?
Kat, for me, it's not really about the meal. I had a burger, but was able to step away from my two kids and have a meal to myself out in the sunshine. So for me, it was all about time to myself. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, it was a bit of an exceptional one for me. I'm planning my wedding at the moment out in Mudgee, which is a bit of a foodie mecca. So we had some time with the caterer and got to taste some of the delights. So that was a lot of fun.
Amazing. A little bit of solitude and a little bit of celebration mixed in there. Before we start today, we'll begin with an acknowledgement of country. So today, I'm joining you from the lands of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to extend respect to all First Nation people from where you are joining today. Before we get started, we have a few important housekeeping items to cover off. So today's session will be recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards. So feel free just to sit back, listen, grab yourself a coffee and enjoy. Please chat away. I can see the chat exploding with food options and things that you've done over the last week. So please continue to use that to discuss ideas, share learnings and best practices with others who are joining us today. Please make sure you're sending your messages to everyone and not just the hosts and panelists. This is the default option and I'm a victim of that. I've been caught out a few times before, not toggling between the two. And we also have the Q&A feature. So please use this if you'd like us to answer any of your questions at the end of today's session. If this is your first time joining us or hearing from CultureAmp, we were founded right here in Melbourne in 2009, and we are the world's leading employee experience platform. We've helped over 6,000, we're almost nudging to 7,000 now, of the world's most innovative and successful companies create a better world of work. We're fortunate enough to have grown and innovated with many of these customers. One of our values at CultureAmp is learn faster through feedback. And with this in mind, we've partnered with our customers to bring their learnings, their strategies, and best practices into our platform. It's something we take a lot of pride in, that when you partner with CultureAmp, you're not just learning from us and our amazing people scientists like Lisa, you're also learning from and benchmarking yourself against the best companies around the globe. CultureAmp pioneered the idea of real-time feedback about 14 years ago, and today, as I mentioned, we are the leading employee experience platform globally. Our mission is to create a better world of work, and we do this by helping companies collect, understand, and act on data across their employees' micro-experiences. We combine people science and technology to put the power in your hands. Our Engage module helps you see below the surface, uncovering insights and sentiment, not only on engagement, but also your company values, DE&I, new ways of working, and of course, the reason why we're all here today, psychosocial hazards. Develop enables your managers and employees to reach their full growth potential, and Perform allows for real-time, continuous feedback to appraise and improve the work that your people do. With CultureAmp, you're able to connect the dots across the whole employee experience, from onboarding surveys through to performance reviews, both at the organizational and individual level. I'm Katrina, and I am honoured to be hosting you all here today. I've been with Culture Amp almost a year and a half now, but I've been a big fan of the company for a very long time. If you've been to a Culture Amp event before, either virtually or in person, you may be familiar with the concept of belonging badges. We like to share these as a way of creating an environment of inclusion, belonging, and connection at our events. It also embraces another one of our core values at Culture Amp, the courage to be vulnerable, by showcasing a part of ourselves that may only be reserved for those who really know us. So with that being said, my 3 belonging badges are daughter, foodie, hence my icebreaker question, and traveller. We'll pop a link to the belonging badges in the chat, so feel free to figure out what your own are and share them with the rest of the group. Lisa, I'm so excited to hear from you today, but before we get into all of the juicy details, I'd love to have you introduce yourself and share your belonging badges.
Thanks, Kat. My name is Lisa Vandertogt, and I'm a senior people scientist here at Culture Amp. I'm also a registered organisational psychologist. I'm actually only one of the 50 people scientists here at Culture Amp who are working really hard to firstly put the science and the rigour into our products, conduct research with our growing data lake so we can share all of our great insights with you, and also get to work with a lot of our customers. My belonging badges are introvert, juggling mum, and also slowly building my indoor plant collection, wondering maybe how many is too many. I'm excited to be here today from a people science perspective, and I'm eager to share a little bit more around the fundamentals of psychosocial hazards. It is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about as it actually inspired my career pathway as an organisational psych. So to help me today, I'm joined by Matt Meffan, Regional Sales Lead in APAC from Unmind. So Matt, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more in Unmind?
Of course, yeah, thank you so much. And we'll be speaking quite a bit about Unmind today. So really pleased to have the opportunity to join the group and have such a strong partnership with Culture Amp. Again, it's a company that I've followed and admired for a long time as well. So yes, I'm based in Sydney. I lead Unmind's APAC region, and I've been involved in the company since 2020. My belonging badges are identical twin, passionate trail runner, and soon to be husband. And I am moving house tomorrow. So this feels like a week where it's all happening.
Amazing.
Yeah. Really quick introduction to Unmind. Sorry to cut you off, Kat. For anybody that's not familiar. So Unmind is a wellbeing solution. It's backed by science and it's built for businesses. And what we're really passionate about is delivering the right care at the right time to really lift the performance of your organization. But then what's more important is demonstrate the impact of investing in your people.
Fantastic. And I know you're all excited to hear from Lisa and Matt today. So just a quick recap of the topics that we'll cover off. So we're really focusing on what psychosocial hazards are and why people in culture and workplace safety leaders should care, how to identify and measure psychosocial risk, and also how to create a supportive and safe workplace. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Kat. So today we are going to be talking about mental health and some of the challenges that we can experience in the workplace. So therefore, it is really important to call out before we start that if you feel like you need support, reach out to some of the support services that are freely available, which are listed on this slide. We'll also share a couple of links in the chat, so Lifeline and Beyond Blue. So what do we mean when we say mental health? It's really likely that we all have a really different meaning when we say mental health, and it's really important for us to be on that same page when we're discussing anything in particular. So for example, mental health or psychosocial hazards. So the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which everyone realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. Another way to think about mental health is on a continuum. So on one side of the continuum, we have a state in which we are flourishing. We feel great and we feel like we can navigate our daily life. I always to this side of the continuum with the sun shining and birds chirping. Not sure why, that's just what pops into my head when I think of it. On the other side, we're struggling with severe impact to our bodies and need additional support to navigate our world. Think about struggling to get out of bed, struggling to complete the essential tasks, or even feeling very little motivation. This is the end where mental ill health sits, and it typically is where a lot of our focus actually falls when we talk about mental health. We automatically think about this end, but in reality, mental health is on a continuum, and most of us sit somewhere between these points. I just want to pause here, and I want you to imagine this continuum on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 in that struggling zone and 10 in the bird chirping zone. Where do you place yourself? Where do you sit? Feel free, pop it in the chat if you feel comfortable. And Matt, what about you? You feel comfortable sharing? Where are you currently sitting on that continuum and why?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm fortunate. I have lots of tools and resources that I've developed. I have a therapist that I see every month, but right now I would have to say I'm a 6, and there's obviously anxiety about moving house. There's a lot that I have to get organized this afternoon. So it would be a direct result of that and completely self-induced.
So yeah, I can see a lot of people sharing in chat, and thank you. Again, if you feel like you need some support, feel free to jump into those resources that we shared. So a couple of things to highlight at this point. Our mental health can change over time in response and exposure to different things. Moving house is a great one. Thanks for sharing that. Getting married is another one. So a challenge that we can also face. And we also, there's lots of things that we know influence where we're sitting at any one point in time. So what about mental health in the workplace? When we talk about mental health in the workplace, we're looking at how our working environment affects us, either moving up the continuum or down the continuum, as well as the effect our mental health has on our ability to do our jobs. Work can make us feel good about ourselves and give us a sense of purpose, which helps protect and improve our mental health. We also know that when we're feeling good at work, we're less likely to taking time off, we're going to be more productive, and we're also less likely to be leaving. On the other hand, there are challenges, which is why we are here and to talk to you today, that can trigger a mental health condition or even cause an existing condition to worsen. These challenges or psychosocial hazards are what we're going to be primarily focusing on today. So speaking of challenges, in that, I would love to hear from you. Specifically, what are the common challenges or psychosocial hazards in the workplace that can impact mental health? Think about your current working environment. Think about your past working environment. What's out as the biggest challenges that move you down that continuum? So while you jump into the chat and share your ideas, Matt, what about you? Challenges at work?
Yeah, of course. And let me, I guess, use the language consistent with what we'll be using today. So I think I'm in a bit of a unique position. I work for a global organization headquartered in London, and the third office that we operate from is New York. So for me, job demands are really high. So the rate at which Unmind is growing and releasing product features, it's really difficult sometimes to keep the team up to date and stay across all of that as well as just myself. And plus my hours can be quite irregular. So often I'm on calls late at night with London, or this morning I was on a call really early with New York. Thankfully, there's a bit of a counterbalance there. So job demands are really high, but my job control is also really high. I have the flexibility to work from the office or at home and take breaks throughout the day if my day is overloaded. So that's kind of the way that I look at things. Just checking, hopefully we haven't lost Lisa permanently here.
I think she may have just been switching to hotspot. It looks like we've got her back now.
We got her back.
There we go.
I am back. Oh, apologies, everyone. Internet always does these funny things. So just jumping into the chat to have a look at what are some of these workloads. Wow, the challenges that everyone is facing. So resourcing issues, long working hours, what we refer to as job demands, relationship with manager. And one thing that we know that always comes through around like lack of support. If managers, leaders are not supportive, that can be a real challenge to our working conditions. Personal mental fatigue leading to burnout. Burnout's another one that often comes up when we're starting to talk around those challenges and outcome. Change fatigue. That one's a really interesting one. We know that change is going to be hard for a lot of people, but how it is managed makes a really big difference to how we feel about change. So that one is a really common one to come up. It is important to flag as we're pulling out all of these challenges that even in great workplaces, there's actually going to be potential challenges or hazards that move us down the continuum. So it's not to say that great places to work don't have these. In fact, if you go through a risk management process and don't find a single psychosocial hazard, I would be wondering, what are we missing? Okay. So these challenges that we've discussed and pulled out in terms of all the challenges that everyone's shared can be referred to as psychosocial hazards. They are aspects of the work which have the potential to cause psychological or physical harm. This definition is actually taken from Comcare, who are the National Work Health and Safety and Workers' Comp Authority. And you can see some of the most common psychosocial hazards on this slide. It is really important to note that this slide isn't exhaustive, but it does reflect the psychosocial hazards that are outlined by Safe Work Australia. The thing about psychosocial hazards is in isolation, they seem pretty straightforward. So for a team who is really struggling with a heavy period of workload, we could be looking for strategies to reduce the workload for the team. So that might be increasing the capacity of the team. It might be redistributing the work, redesigning the work, or even prioritizing differently. But the thing about psychosocial hazards is that they rarely happen in a vacuum, and prolonged exposure and accumulation of different things and different psychosocial hazards can increase the risk. So that is the likelihood that the exposure to the hazard increases potential harm. So I was actually working with an org a few years back when I was consulting, and they identified workload as a key focus for them. Workload is commonly referred to as job demands as a psychosocial hazard, and this is what they continuously heard from their employees. So we have too much work to do, we can't possibly get it done, we have to work really, really long hours. But what they found is it wasn't just there was lots of work to get done. They actually hired more team members to address this issue, and then they continue to have reports that this has not impacted the experience, it's still too much to do. So when they actually dove into this problem in a little bit more detail, they conducted a comprehensive survey, focus groups, and also some interviews. They found, of course, surprise, surprise, it wasn't just workload. It was about the way the work was designed. So firstly, with a team size of 50, this meant that staff had very little support. They had little guidance and also little recognition from their manager. Just imagine trying to be across 50 team members. The team also had very little control over the timeframes for completing their work or how much they needed to get done. The demands of the work were also really emotionally demanding due to the content. This required a lot of high cognitive energy to process, and they also had to remain very emotionally neutral when they were dealing with their clients. Perhaps one of the most intriguing findings related to the cultural behaviours that acted as a barrier for seeking support and reporting inappropriate behaviours. So therefore, it's not really surprising that HR and leaders only heard workload. But that was actually just one of the many psychosocial hazards that was stacked up. In contrast, sometimes the risk of exposure to psychosocial hazards can be reduced by other factors. Matt, in your experience working with organisations in this space, what factors can be a resource to buffer against some of these challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think like this is relatively new language here in Australia. I think we should be really proud we're the first nation on earth where this has become an employer obligation and we're really going to set the standard. So obviously and naturally there's a real focus on the legislative language and regulatory requirements. I'm going to share a report here, and I think it acts as a really useful reminder that the path that we should be on is this path towards systemic change. So thinking about how do we truly change the culture and embed the culture. And if we look at, so this is a report from Deloitte from March this year, and in their research, it shows that focusing just on the regulatory standards is really the lowest level of maturity. And there's some really good advice there. And how do we think about the utopia and think beyond that, which is that true systemic change that naturally is going to involve everybody, and everybody has a role.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good point to think about your own workplace. Would you say that it's mentally healthy? So I'm going to do a quick poll. Just a quick recap on the definition of mental health: a state of well-being in which everyone realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So do you think your workplace is that?
We don't have the results yet. I'm going to
Not
guess 60%.
Here we go.
58, close.
Thoughts, Matt?
I mean, yeah, that is, it's not entirely surprising. And it's actually positive that on the balance here, people are operating in environments that they see as mentally healthy. So I think that's encouraging.
Absolutely. And this reflects a study that was actually conducted a few years back in terms of asking this particular question. And what they found was, although 91% of employees believed that mental health was really important in their workplace, only 1 in 2 of employees actually believed their workplace was mentally healthy. So very similar stats to that research. So given that we know that workers are likely to be exposed to a range of psychosocial hazards, challenges in the workplace, we know that roughly 1 in 2 are thinking that their workplace is not mentally healthy. What is the cost of that? Okay, so we all either have been or know someone that's been struggling with their working environment. This has had a huge impact on how they feel, whether that is about their role, the work they do, might be tensions with their manager or colleague, or even working in a really toxic culture. Unfortunately, I have worked with many people who felt that Sunday dread. I've been one of them. My first job ended up being like that for me. And I remember not wanting to go to work the next day, being worried about everything that I would face when I arrived. I remember feeling sick as I drove in, and also feeling like I was walking on eggshells. This is one of the many reasons that I do what I do as an org psych, as I hope to create a world of work where no one hates going to work, or at least a world of work that does no harm. So in addition to our own experience in this space, there are lots of compelling data points that help build our business case. Firstly, in a report outlined by Beyond Blue, 1 in 5 Australian workers reported taking time off work due to feeling mentally unwell in the past 12 months. We know 1 in 3 people have experienced sexual harassment at work, as outlined by Safe Work Australia. We are also seeing a rise in claims related to work demand. So Comcare reporting an 18% increase over the last 3 years. Additionally, workplace mental health conditions are one of the costliest forms of workplace injury, with Safe Work Australian data showing that they lead to significantly more time off work and also higher compensation paid when compared to physical injuries and diseases. It's huge. In fact, the Productivity Commission estimates that mental health costs the Australian economy between 10 and 18 billion in lost productivity and reduced participation every year. We also know that the challenges related to mental health seem to be compounding. Since the pandemic, more people are experiencing or report that they're experiencing more challenges than ever before, but also seeking more help. So according to the Australian Psychological Society, before the pandemic, only 1 in 100 psychologists was not accepting new clients, whereas now only 1 in 3 psychologists are unable to see new clients. Huge. Are these statistics surprising? Jump into the chat, share your thoughts. And Matt, what about you? Surprises? Anything to add? What are you seeing from Unmind?
Yeah, I mean, this has certainly been the trend. The Committee for Economic Development in Australia, which they produced another report last year, which is really consistent. There's another report which really stood out to me, and I'm thinking about this kind of empathetic view of the organization. So there was, again, it was research from Deloitte. They looked at individuals who are intending to depart their organization because of the environment as it relates to mental health or psychological safety. 57% of employees reported an intent to depart. But what was more surprising is that when they isolated senior executives, 70% of those individuals reported wanting to leave their jobs for a safer environment. So I think that was really surprising, and it's a reminder that this impacts everybody.
And there's lots more in this space. Matt, what about the benefits?
Yeah, and I think this, again, that we don't want to lose sight of the upside here. So if we look at, the benefits to an organization that does, go beyond the protect, and we really think about the promote, we know that we have much higher engagement, so 8 times as reported by the World Economic Forum. If anybody has read Josh Berson's research, so kind of one of the foremost thought leaders in HR, there's a report called The Healthy Organization. Those organizations are 220% more likely to be meeting their financial targets and rated as a great place to work, which I guess is an aspirational goal for all of us. 1 in 2 Australian employees, they have, so this is a reflective view, have left an organization because of a poor environment, mental health environment. And we also know that we take 6 times less sickness leave, so absenteeism essentially is 6 times less if our workplace is reported as psychologically healthy. So again, more and more reasons compounding to really get this right. And then if we're looking at the dollars and cents, which is often where senior executives need the justification, probably the most relevant for Australia is the PwC report, where they have measured $2.30 ROI for any investment in a wellbeing initiative. So I think, again, the risk lens is certainly the best thing, and we have to focus on getting that right. But let's not lose sight of the upside, all of the positive reasons why we should be thinking about this and putting programs in place.
Absolutely. And onto that risk side of things, not only should we be paying attention to psychosocial hazards to make the world of work better, we know that employers have now been put on notice that they have a legal obligation to make sure that their workplaces are psychologically safe. So what is all this talk about legal obligations? The legal landscape of work health and safety, or WHS, has been on quite the journey in the past 12 years in Australia. So back in 2011, Safe Work Australia developed the model work health safety laws. This was intended to harmonise and bring everyone together onto the same page for work health safety across Australia, and also broaden the definition of health to include psychological health. To date, all states and territories, excluding Victoria, have now implemented the model work health safety laws. This means that a person conducting a business or undertaking, a PCBU, is now required, as far as reasonably practicable, to ensure that workers and other people in the workplace are not exposed to risks to their psychological health and safety, as well as to risk to their physical health and safety. A review was conducted in 2017-18 called the Boland Review. This identified that psychological health was largely neglected in the regulations and the code of practice. Adding in psychological health wasn't going to be enough to change things. Hence why we are seeing some real changes now. It's in an effort to make it really more explicit to what is required to manage psychosocial health in the workplace. And this actually led Safe Work Australia to update the model work health safety in June 2022. So last year. The amendments to the model work health safety don't automatically apply in a jurisdiction, as each state and territory is responsible for both legislating and regulating their approach. So to date, New South Wales, WA, Tasmania and Queensland all have approved codes of practices for managing psychosocial hazards, with other states and territories expected to follow. So a quick word on Victoria. Although they did not enact the model work health safety, doesn't mean they're lagging behind. They are actually in the process of amending their own occupational health and safety regulations 2017 to include amendments addressing psychosocial risks. So these proposed regulations are expected to start this year and also anticipate to have a very robust reporting requirement. It is also important to note that the amended work health safety laws came into effect in the Commonwealth jurisdiction at the start of this month. So what is the key takeaway here? The WHS laws in Australia are legislated and regulated separately by each of Australia's state, territory and Commonwealth jurisdictions. This means it's confusing. Who does what, when, etc. It's very confusing. Therefore, we recommend that you actually check with your local regulator regarding your local requirements, and we'll share in the chat the relevant information so you can check out your own local requirements. We know that creating a mentally healthy environment is not only great for our people, it's also starting to be written into these laws. And it's going to ensure that employers are going to be managing psychosocial hazards in the workplace as is reasonably practicable. So what does that mean? How can we manage psychosocial risks? Before we speak to how we can manage the psychosocial hazard, it is important for those who are new to the world of risk management to get a little bit more comfortable with the terminology. So a quick poll for you. What is the difference between a psychosocial hazard and a psychosocial risk? Anticipation.
It's a bit like a quiz show, isn't it? I like this poll.
It is. Excellent. So just reinforcing, a psychosocial hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, whereas a psychosocial risk is the likelihood of that hazard causing harm. Okay, so back to business. How do we manage a psychosocial risk? Managing psychosocial risks is no different to how you should be managing any other hazard or risk in your workplace. This is really about broadening our view on what potential hazards exist in our workplaces and also how best we control for these hazards. When we put on the risk management hat, we have 4 steps to follow. So the first is to identify hazards and risk factors. There's a variety of ways you can do this, but consulting with your workforce, using tools and surveys, observing the workplace as well as the work, and reviewing available information is all recommended. The second step is to assess the risk associated with the hazards. This means that for every hazard that you identify, you'll need to assess the likelihood of harm related to exposure to the hazard, and also look at how the risk might be higher with exposure to multiple hazards. So that's stacking of psychosocial hazard exposure. The third step is to control the risks. So where practicable, it is important to eliminate risks, so get rid of them. However, when this isn't possible, it is required to minimize the risks as far as practicable. There is a framework called the hierarchy of controls that you can look at. Some jurisdictions actually have to follow that in terms of their decision making for controlling the risks, but that's something you can check out. We'll share some links in the chat. Finally, you are required to monitor and review the effectiveness of your controls. So this step requires you to evaluate the effectiveness of your approach and also make the changes as necessary. The good news is that CultureAmp and Unmind are here to help you, and we can support your efforts by firstly helping you collect the right data to identify hazards in your organisation, by using that data collected to help assess the potential risk of harm across your organisation, by providing inspirations backed by science on how you might control risks in your organisations. We've partnered with Unmind here. In addition, Unmind has lots of great resources and guidance in this space for controlling psychosocial hazards. And CultureAmp can also support in relation to collecting ongoing survey data to monitor the effectiveness of controls and ongoing hazard identification. So let's explore in a little bit more detail. One thing to flag first is I would recommend that everyone is not relying on a single source of data to inform your identification and also assessment of psychosocial hazards. This means don't just look at the reports coming in, the workers' comp claims, or a single workplace inspection or survey. It is really important to be gathering multiple sources of data to look for trends and also to inform the next steps in your risk management process. The importance of this was really apparent to me when I was working with a client a few years ago. They were actually trying to solve a cultural problem of gossiping in the workplace, very common challenge to have. They wanted to run a workshop to reinforce the code of behaviour, so emphasising what was appropriate and what was inappropriate in the workplace. Rather than just jumping into that control or the solution, we worked with the organisation to take a step back and identify what is the root cause by using a workforce survey, focus groups, and follow-up interviews. What did we find? Rather than a workforce that just liked to gossip, they were actually afraid to speak up and afraid to share their ideas or report any ideas. This lack of psychological safety resulted in a lot of staff whispering, mistrust to the leadership team and their actions. Also, a lot of the staff were engaging in inappropriate behaviours, which was having a cumulative negative impact on staff. So I share this with you as we're talking around the risk management process, because rather than just focusing on the surface level problems, we need to be able to dig a little bit deeper to understand what is the root cause of these problems. Therefore, we can actually truly solve them. If we were to run a simple workshop on appropriate and inappropriate behaviours, would this have solved the problem? I don't think it would have. So how can we do this? To help make it easier for organisations to identify psychosocial hazards and risk factors, our people science team has developed a psychosocial health template that's now available to all Culture Amp customers. Yay! This template aims to support companies to create mentally healthy environments and also reduce that risk of harm associated with exposure to psychosocial hazards. What is really special about this template, although it doesn't shy away from the questions that need to be asked, it does frame questions in a positive way, because ultimately that is the environment we are striving for. This positive psychology lens means that the survey experience for users is not as abrupt or jarring, with a lot of employees who have completed similar surveys highlighting that it can take quite a personal toll just moving through all of those questions. As with all our science-backed templates on the platform, you can be really confident that you're asking the right questions and you'll be able to make sense of the data with a few clicks. If you're already a Culture Amp customer leveraging our templates, for example, the employee engagement, wellbeing, and also the inclusion, you'll notice that you're already asking some of the questions in this template. This is because psychosocial factors are not just about avoiding negative, they are also key drivers of things like employee engagement, wellbeing, and inclusion. In addition, I've also been working with lots of customers already who are opting to adapt their employee engagement surveys to include relevant psychosocial hazards from this template. So you can continue to track and take action as needed without adding more and more surveys to your regular survey cadence. So you can see a little bit of a glimpse of the user experience on this screen. For those interested in the detail, here is the sneak peek of what the survey covers. So the template includes a wellbeing outcome measure from our original wellbeing question set. This index measures the 3 key elements of burnout as defined by the World Health Organization. Important to note that although this isn't a formal diagnosis, it does act as an early indicator of burnout, which is a really important inclusion in the template. The rest of the template is largely based on the psychosocial hazards outlined by Safe Work Australia, which we've shared earlier in the webinar and talked to, but we have grouped the hazards in a little bit of a different way to help reduce some of the cognitive load for employees who complete the survey. The reporting is aligned to the Safe Work Australia. So at a high level, this is what we're covering. So mental, physical, and emotional job demands, key elements of job design, which refer to the way the work is organised, available support at work at the manager, colleague, and organisational level, organisational practices, which covers the org system, processes, and also the ways of working, which we know can impact employees' wellbeing. And the template also includes questions to investigate exposure to inappropriate workplace behaviours and also additional risk factors as outlined by Safe Work Australia. Our team of people scientists have also included a psychological safety pulse and intent to stay measure. This helps you further contextualise the results and the potential impact. It is important to emphasise at this point that every organisation has a unique context and will likely have different needs. Therefore, we recommend tailoring the template to better align with the anticipated hazards your workplace may be experiencing, and also to check with your legal team. Okay, next up, step 2. So the second step in managing risk is assessing the risks associated with exposure to the hazards. So how does Culture Amp platform help here? It is important to flag that the Culture Amp platform will not provide your risk score, but what it does is collate your workforce survey results so you can identify what does your current state look like, what are the differences you can observe between different teams, departments, levels of seniority in the org, locations, or even shift patterns. It's such a powerful tool that helps you identify, firstly, psychosocial hazards at the org level, but equally as powerful to help you dive into the detail and explore what are the similarities or the differences of exposure to psychosocial hazards for different demographic groups. Example, although psychosocial hazards related to job demands might be quite reasonable or look reasonable at the org level, the Culture Amp heat map helps you identify if particular teams may be struggling. Therefore, you can further investigate in the right place, have the right conversations with the right people, and also take action and document your approach on the platform. Matt, I would love for you to jump in at this point and tell us a little bit more about how this plays out in the real world.
Yeah, of course. So one of our goals for today was to make this as kind of realistic and put you in the shoes of a real business. And I think one of the most dramatic examples that I've seen is, so we support a lot of insurance companies, and that's been a particularly difficult space in Australia over the last year. So if you think about customer aggression, these individuals are experiencing a lot of vicarious trauma. So customers who are calling in a very vulnerable state, they've had an incident happen and they really need help. So historically, a lot of these customer support centers would operate in an office location in a group setting. And if an individual had a really difficult call, they could turn around to a peer and kind of debrief, decompress, and they had peer support networks and things like that. If you switch to the way that a lot of businesses operate today, these individuals are taking calls sometimes in their bedroom in complete isolation, and they don't have the means to turn around and decompress. And what we've seen in some of those cases is that the likelihood of harm and the risk has really increased. So I think just to contextualize some of the things that we're speaking about, these are the types of examples that might exist within your own businesses, and we should be planning for.
Absolutely. And a nice way to lead us on, step 3 is all about controlling the risks. And Matt, I'm going to hand over to you again, and if you could share some ideas around how Unmind can support, and also the role of inspirations in the platform.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely. And I think this is where this becomes really, really unique. So we've spoken with a lot of organizations who have collected data, and they're sort of stuck with the moment. They've run their assessment and said, sort of, now what? And I think what we're really proud to have worked and built with Culture Amp is really, really clear direction. So I think like data and measurement can be one of the most important and valuable things to a business. Data and measurement without action can actually be one of the most harmful things to a business. So what we've partnered in doing is we've built in inspirations that represent both so the individual, the team or the manager level, and at the organizational level. So what we can do is we can start to make recommendations in terms of how to mitigate against these risk factors. One thing that I should be really clear on is that this takes a lot of effort. So you're going to get ideas and inspiration. It's not going to execute the program for you. And I think that's where Unmind comes in, and we were built to control the vast majority of these psychosocial hazards. So I think that's, anybody that uses the template and sees this come to life, we're excited and excited to get your feedback. And here's just an example of what one of these organizational recommendations might look like.
the inspirations are really that foundation piece of, how do you start taking action, and the ability to actually do that live in the platform, click on it and actually monitor it. So I think that's also a really powerful part of the platform, that you can actually document how you are taking action and measure your effectiveness from that point. Okay, so the fourth step in the process is actually to monitor and review the effectiveness of your controls. So it is really important that we don't say that this is the final step, because the truth of the matter is that we'll never be finished a risk management process. It's an ongoing cycle. And this is the step, in my opinion, that we often fall down. So we ran a wellbeing workshop. It's nice, but did we actually measure to see if it made a difference? We redesigned the work with a team after extensive consultation. It's nice, but did we measure to see if it actually made a difference? Is that fruit basket on the kitchen table making a difference, or is it just nice to have? Again, this is where CultureAmp can help by uploading things like demographic data on participation in training, interventions, or work programs. You can clearly see if there's a difference between those who've received the intervention and those who didn't. Additionally, CultureAmp makes it easy to compare about how you're tracking over time by using the same question sets over time. Even if you're not looking to identify psychosocial hazards using workforce surveys, have a little bit more of a think about how you're going to monitor the effectiveness of your pre-post interventions to see, is it actually working? This is essential. Let's bring a little bit more science to our workplaces. If something isn't working, wouldn't you like to know so we can fix it? In a nutshell, that is the risk management process. So you identify hazards, assess the risks using the gathered information, take action with your controls, and also review and monitor the process. CultureAmp and Unmind are here to help, and we can support you across this process as you navigate making your world of work better. We are all likely to be at really different stages on this journey, so in creating a mentally healthy workplace. For some, it will be about how can we set up our risk management approach in a really simple way to allow us to meet our requirements. And for others, who are a bit further along the journey, it might be about how do we embed this in our day-to-day and start creating and maintaining a safe and supportive culture. We could spend days, weeks, months, I would like to say years even, detailing how do you actually create and maintain a safe and supportive culture. But instead today, we're going to talk about some of the essential ingredients, or what are the must-haves to shaping your culture in this space. If you are thinking about creating a wellbeing or mental health strategy, listen up, some key points for you to consider as you're writing your strategy. Matt, Unmind obviously does this day in, day out. What do you think are the most important ingredients for creating a safe and supportive culture in orgs?
Yeah, so let's start at the top. I think there's one that's an absolute non-negotiable, and that's having senior executive support. These individuals set the tone, they act as a sponsor, and ultimately, if you don't have at least one senior executive willing to sponsor your program, then you're going to have a really, really difficult challenge. The second one, so I think it obviously, like anything you do in business, it's really important to connect it to your broader strategy. So your business strategy informs everything that your business does, the decisions that you make, and helps to justify why you're making those decisions. So again, it's really, really important, if you think about the well-being and the performance of your people, to connect it to those strategic pillars. And then third, and I think I would consider this the second most important, is acknowledging that everybody has a role to play. I mean, I've seen in the chat, a lot of you here today are, the representative of people and culture, or the representative of work health and safety. You absolutely cannot do this on your own. So involve everybody and in terms of your consultations and your delivery, and that's how you change a culture. And yeah, we have a framework for this. So Unmind has been doing this, like Lisa said, since 2016. You've got to look at your organization in terms of distinct needs. So again, senior leaders, helping them understand how to set the tone and talk about this in the right way. And then also actually what sort of language or behaviors are unhelpful. And they've got to really role model those positive behaviors. A big part of what Unmind focuses on is the manager level. So making sure that managers have the tools and the information that they need to create those environments where their teams can flourish. Champions, some of you might refer to the champions as kind of wellbeing ambassadors, the wellbeing committee. A lot of organizations do use that language. So these are the people that activate the program on the ground. They support the people that it's core to their function. They may have lived experience, but it's people that are deeply passionate about this and want to make change. And then we do have to equip every employee with tools as well. Very quickly, looking at the role of a manager. So it is much broader than it has ever been before. We have to be considerate of neurodivergent people in our teams and how we can best accommodate their needs. We need to look at psychological safety. And then obviously everything around job design and psychosocial hazards. So Unmind has a catalogue of over 50 kind of short practical videos that are evidence informed that help managers to, I guess, perform their duties in the best possible way.
I love that. And managers do play that really crucial role, right? With that, they're kind of the glue that holds everything together, and we're just kind of expecting more and more on their tool belt. So I think it's great that there's some resources that can support around how do we build further capability in this area. The next must-have is actually to move beyond the fruit basket. So I am going to call it out, talking about the elephant in the room. If you're wondering where do the baskets fit in, or the gym memberships, they don't, full stop. Although a really nice perk and benefit for employees, they are unlikely to actually shift the culture and create one of support. So rather than just focusing on how we support individuals to prioritize their own well-being, we need to start to look at, how do our leaders and consequently our teams prioritize well-being? And also at that organizational level, how do we support mental health by good job design, appropriate supports, the right policies and procedures, and also the overarching culture that we have? If you have a fire in your building, you don't just give everyone fire-resistant overalls. You put the fire out. So it's really important to ensure that in terms of the wellbeing or mental health initiatives we put in place and not just acting like that fire-resistant overall. This brings me to the final must-have for your approach. So you need to broaden your approach. And by that, I mean, don't just think about the supports available to individuals who are having trouble. So they're what we refer to as tertiary interventions. Start to move beyond that and consider what supports and interventions are available for those who may be starting to struggle, which are called secondary interventions, and also how to avoid them in the first place, which are primary or proactive interventions. A nice way to think about this for psychosocial risks is, what do you have in place to support those who are struggling? What do you need to do to support those who are starting to struggle or experience challenges based on exposure to that hazard? And what can you do to ensure that no one else is impacted in this way? So that's lots of stuff to go through today. Felt like I was talking really fast with everything to go through. But as we wrap up the content side of the webinar and start heading into the Q&A, some final thoughts to highlight. So although this has not come out of nowhere, Australia is making amazing grounds here, but this is and should be a priority for all organisations in Australia. Remember to check with your local regulator or expert to understand the specific requirements that you need to meet. The risk management process is not new, so you don't have to create something new. You just need to apply the same approach you have been utilising for physical safety to psychological safety. Remember that one of the most important things to do is actually measure the effectiveness of your controls, improving your approach. And one thing that I do ask for everyone is actually to share your learnings widely. This is something that we haven't done well in the past, but the more that we can share our learnings widely, the better we can make the world of work. And I also think there's one thing to call out, that it presents an amazing opportunity that we've got HR, OD, WHS and legal teams all thinking about this space. So this is an opportunity for us to work more collaboratively. We're all in positions where we can make that world of work better.
Lisa, Matt, thank you so much. As you could see by the chat, this topic has really gained such momentum and exposure over the last few years. The real aha moment for me was the true cost slide. And I really love that fire blanket analogy as well. So I'll definitely be going back to the recording for everyone that's asked today. Yes, we'll share the recording, the slides, and all of the links and the reports that Matt pointed us to early next week, most likely. Before we jump into the questions, as you know, at Culture Amp, we love feedback. We're popping a link in the chat. So if you're able to take just a couple of minutes out of your day, we'd really appreciate your thoughts. We've received a lot of questions, both in the chat, in Q&A before the session today. So we may only get to a few of these now, but again, we'll share a summary and some follow-up resources early next week. So I think you're going to kick us off with the first question, Matt. I'd love to throw to you. What are the most effective strategies you have seen for mitigating risk from psychosocial hazards?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like I said, the strongest position that you can be in is finding a way to involve everybody, and that's from the senior executive to the person sitting next to you. And I think one piece of advice is, when we create that environment where people are willing to be vulnerable, that's when we have a foundation for that systemic change. So think about the Champions Network and think about how you can embed the ambassadors and the people in every part of the organization who are promoting the program. And I'm not talking about a poster on a bathroom stall or a EAP fridge magnet that you might wander past and ignore occasionally. I'm thinking about conversations, and particularly helping to understand. I think one of my favorite things about Culture Amp's solution is the ability to distribute the data and the insights and the inspirations right away. So managers are empowered, functional leaders are empowered, and naturally it's going to become everybody's responsibility. So that would be my advice.
It takes a village. Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think absolutely everything that Matt said, echo and amplify. This is a question I often get asked, and I have been working in the field for a while. So in particular, working with some pretty high risk populations where this is a particularly hard thing to do. How do we eliminate exposure to psychosocial hazards that is near impossible due to the nature of the work? So it can be really, really difficult. The most effective strategies that I've seen, as Matt said, are holistic in nature. So they consider what is the individual, team, leader, organizational level. They also look to best practice where possible. They consider the role of the intervention. So I've already talked about that primary, secondary, and tertiary. And also the need to be underpinned by consultation. So including everyone along for the process. And perhaps one of the things that we often overlook is the actual comms plan or the extensive communication that we have attached to any initiative. You might have the best initiative in the world, but without people knowing about it, the role, the why, the how, what to expect, it's likely going to fall over. So that one's really important to highlight. This one's particularly important to my heart because the risk of sending out perceived superficial initiatives can have far greater consequences than doing nothing. So my husband actually worked in emergency services frontline for 13 years. During his time, obviously, dealing with critical incidents day in, day out, he only ever received one email and one fridge magnet checking in. So just thinking if putting yourself in those shoes, how would you feel? I know one question that he always asks is, why that one particular incident did I get that email? And I'm not saying that those interventions and those initiatives are the perfect ones to have, they are right, but it necessarily wasn't communicated. People didn't understand how it was used and also the culture and how that fits in. So a couple of things to highlight there.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that was super relevant. I saw something in the chat. Someone was talking about the police force in Alice Springs. So really great that you've kind of shared your own personal experience with the frontline there. Moving on to the second question, are there any tactics or tips that you can share to get buy-in from managers to advocate for the importance of psychosocial hazards?
Yeah, I think consultation, again, you would be very hard pressed to find someone who hasn't had or experienced lived experience through either themselves or a loved one. So people, mental ill health is becoming proportionately much higher in the community, and that naturally is going to ignite people's passion. So run the consultation, get people involved and feeling as if they're a part of, as Lisa said, the communications plan, and it's something that they connect with and personalize. I mean, that's one thing that Unmind is deeply passionate about. It's it's not a generic monthly campaign. We don't do Nutrition August and Resilience September. It's about meeting people where they are. And that might be through kind of proactive on-demand learning, or it might be, really easy access to therapists. And I think you got to intuitively understand the right intervention for the right moment.
I love that. One size doesn't fit all. So having that adaptable approach is really important.
We're going to jump on. Fantastic. Keeping an eye on the clock and being respectful of everyone's time. Before we wrap up, I'd love to give a shout out for our next webinar on the 18th of May. So prioritising the employee experience in today's economic climate. Our lead people scientist, Tony Tran, will be joined by Fleet Partners CPO, Zoe Huggins, as they explore how to justify your employee experience investment in today's changing economic environment, and also share some research and data on getting the most value from your employee experience solution. For those of you still on the call, you can scan the QR code just on your screen, or you can visit the URL, which the team will pop in the chat there as well. We love connecting our community inside, outside of the technology. So we've popped a few options on the screen here. So it's where global HR professionals, people leaders, and change agents can come together to be inspired by, ideate and learn from each other, as you've all been doing in the chat today. So just touching on, our global culture first chapters, a really great place for you to meet in person with your teams. Our Slack community, for those of you that are maybe a bit more remote than others, you can jump on at any time and ask questions and receive advice and network with others in your space. But also we've got the People Geek Answers channel as well, which is a digital forum that you can seek broader advice on from each other as well. So lots of different ways to stay in touch with everyone that's joined us on the call today, and others that may not have made it. So again, I just want to thank you all for your time today, Lisa and Matt. That was such an important session. We will be sharing the recording, and I hope you all have a great Friday.
Thank you. Everybody enjoy lunch.